Hello and welcome to 10 by 9, where 9 people have up to 10 minutes each to tell a true story from their own life. I'm Paul Dorn, and this is the 10 by 9 podcast. I'd been planning to take the summer off from the podcast, but how could I resist when I had wonderful stories on the theme holiday from our July evening in Belfast's Black Box. No point keeping them for November, so prepare for 3 balmy stories.
I'm an old woman now, with one foot in the grave and the other on its edge. As an opening sentence, this didn't exactly engage the interest of us teenage boys.
One of my brothers considered himself something of a fishing expert and tried to untangle the eel, and his attempts to free it only wound it up more. The next thing I heard was my brother's shriek. Bright red gleamed on his palm.
He looked very like Ringo Starr. Like, really like Ringo Starr.
Ringo Starr, indeed. Who would have thought he'd appear in a 10 by 9 story? Well, we'll see. Okay, let's kick off with a wonderful 10 by 9 regular, all the way from Cork. It's Richard O'Leary.
It was long, long ago, in the last century, in 1980, when I was a schoolboy. I had just turned 16. I grew up in Cork, as you all know, and which is the best place in the world. But even I wanted to see beyond Cork. I envied my contemporaries in Northern Ireland, some of whom, as children during the Troubles, were sent by generous Americans on a free holiday from Ireland across the Atlantic to America. I fancied crossing the Atlantic, but I didn't qualify for it as a child of the Troubles. So I came up with my own plan for a holiday. Where do you think I headed? No, that was later. I headed west, to the far west, to the edge of Ireland, where it meets the Atlantic Ocean, to West County Kerry, where the next parish is America. As a 16-year-old schoolboy, the far west of County Kerry still seemed to me to be rather exotic. In West Kerry, the locals there, they didn't speak English as a first language, they spoke the Irish language, an Gaeilge. I was already learning at my Catholic secondary school, Gaeilge, or Gaelic, as you prefer to call it here in the north. At school, on the curriculum for studying Irish, the core text for the intermediate certificate examination was a book called Peig. This book, it's a memoir of a woman called Peig Sayers, who spent her life in an Irish-speaking area called a Gaeltacht in West Kerry on the Dingle Peninsula. Her memoir was published in 1936. Anyone my age who's educated in the South will remember having to read Peig. There's a picture of Peig on the cover, a picture of her as an old woman wearing a traditional shawl. I, as a bored schoolboy, drew by hand on the picture of Peig, a pair of trendy sunglasses and dangling earrings. The opening sentence of her memoir, written in Irish, reads, Shanavana sat misha anish, and will, kind of read in the dark, and will cosles an uig is an chos ella arabuk, which translates as, I am an old woman now, with one foot in the grave and the other on its edge. As an opening sentence, this didn't exactly engage the interest of us teenage boys. Nevertheless, as a schoolboy, I was curious to visit the Dingle Peninsula, the place where Peig grew up and is buried, a place called Dunhuin. I worked out that I could get from Cork to Dunhuin in a few days by cycling. So in July 1980, I set off on my bicycle. For accommodation, I would stay in youth hostels. Here's my membership card from 1980 from the Irish Youth Hostel Association. And on it are written the rules which include hostel users should bring their own towels and must use a sheet sleeping bag. So I packed my towel and my sleeping bag. If you're wondering how I got on, I can refer you to an account of my holiday, which I wrote in our school magazine. This our school magazine called The Forum, with a picture of the Catholic ceremony on the front and the papal colours of yellow and white. And the piece was titled Onoiga, and Onoiga is the Irish name of the Irish Youth Hostel Association. And it's also, in the Irish language, the word for the youth. I was young once. Here's an extract which I wrote. Last summer, I made a tour of West Cork and Kerry with two friends. We cycled to Killarney, but it rained. And for the next few days, soakings became a daily routine. It was raining again as we drifted into Kinmare. On the back of my hostel card are stamped in ink pictures of the hostels I stayed at, including a stamp for the hostel at Ireland's highest mountain in Kerry, at Corán Túil. But there was no ink stamp for the youth hostel at Dunhuin in the West Kerry Gaeltacht. The weather that July was so wet that I cut my holiday trip short. I did not get to see where Peig grew up and is buried. I never made it to Dunhuin. After my leaving cert in 1982, I left Cork. I emigrated to Dublin. I then came north to live here in Belfast. And since then, the decades have flown by, and I forgot about Peig. Until earlier this year, when I was decluttering my house. Now, some of you do not believe I would ever declutter my house. But lo and behold, I found again my schoolbook copy of Peig. And Shanavan Isha Mishenish, and will costless and ruig, is an chos ella our book. I previously read this when I was 16, and now I am here again, rereading it, having just turned 60. But good things come to those who wait. This year, I was motivated to brush up on my Irish and to return to Irish language class. And the nearest class where I live is run by an organisation called Turris, founded by Linda Irvine. And Turris is based at the East Belfast Mission, the Protestant mission. Because the Irish language is becoming fashionable. Even some Protestants in Belfast are learning it. This summer, it was coming up to the 12th of July holiday, and I realised that I hadn't made any plans to get away from Belfast. And didn't I overhear at Turris that some of them were going away for the 12th to the Gaeltacht to improve their Irish? And I said to Linda, count me in. So after we head to the Gaeltacht, but no, Linda said we wouldn't be heading to the Gaeltacht in Donegal. She said we'd be heading to the Gaeltacht in West Kerry, which is why our holiday WhatsApp group was called in Irish, Kiri 2024. And Linda messaged us to say we'd be staying in the hostel in Dunhuin. And I received from Linda this WhatsApp message, a charge beg mála cuddleta, agus tuali di orf. Friends, you'll need a sleeping bag and a towel. So once again, I packed my towel and my sleeping bag. Not the same sleeping bag as a teenager. I mean, I had bought a new one. So 44 years after this schoolboy from Cork failed in 1980 to visit Peig's home place and grave, this year I eventually made it to Dunhuin to see them, and I even picked up a postcard, because I like to collect souvenirs and evidence, proof that I completed my holidays to Dunhuin in the West Kerry Gaeltacht, this time with a group of Irish language learning Protestants from Belfast. Better late than never.
Thanks so much, Richard. As always, a pleasure to have you at the 10 by 9 mic, and thanks also for the gorgeous Gilliga. 10by9 is always on the lookout for new storytellers, so get in touch at 10by9.com. But I've noticed in recent months a shortage of women coming forward, so please, if you've a story but are a little reluctant or shy, let me know and I'll do my best to help you to get your story out there. Okay, on to our next story, and she was our only first timer of the evening on July 31st, so say hello to Jasmin Awoodun.
For 10 years, I was outsmarted by a pigeon. Specifically, the pink pigeon, a species endemic to Mauritius, very pale pink, with brown wings and a fuchsia beak. It's been considered vulnerable to extinction since 2018, an enormous conservation success, considering at one point only 10 remained in the wild. Maybe it was down to its rarity, maybe its colouring, but the pink pigeon was the first bird I fell in love with. Some people are born loving birds. Others, like me, discover this crucial facet of their identity later. It was when I was 11 that my family first visited Mauritius and my pursuit of the pink pigeon began. That was the start of my awakening. I knew about pink pigeons from a presentation on Mauritius I did for school. They aren't the most emblematic of Mauritian birds. That honour goes to the dodo, which for an extinct bird is surprisingly pervasive throughout the island. But pink pigeons came to represent all my hopes for what Mauritius would be, acquiring an almost mythic status during the years my ancestral homeland was something I only heard about rather than experienced. So when we finally did visit the island, I was determined to find the bird I'd imbued with symbolic value for so long. Mauritian avians were so different to the birds I was used to in cold, wet England. There were striped zebra doves, black and yellow miners, weaver birds named for their method of nest building, red-whiskered bulbuls that we nicknamed Mohican birds for their spiky crests, but no sign of the pink pigeon. With increasing desperation, I studied forest canopies and the trees fringing the beaches, hoping to see a flash of bright pink amongst the greenery. I took the pink part of the name very literally, a fatal error. I was searching for a hot pink bird of my imagination, one that refused to start existing just for me. Meanwhile, the real pink pigeon had given me the slip. I forgot my quest for the pink pigeon until 5 years later, when my family was back in Mauritius and visiting Trebiche, a town in the Pamplemousses district in the northwest. We'd gone to the aquarium there, which turned out to be the smallest we'd ever visited. Mauritius has since built an aquarium with more than 10 tanks, and we got round it faster than expected. Afterwards, we went to the beach. My brothers attempted to fish, having wrapped fishing line around empty plastic bottles, while my sister used her makeshift rod to lower food crabs in the rock pools. I was walking along the beach, hoping to spot something interesting, when I noticed a pinkish, pigeon-like bird in the tree above me. Immediately I went very still, terrified the bird would fly away before I got a good look. Luckily, it seemed unbothered. Now I could experience Mauritius firsthand. I no longer needed to translate my feelings for this place into feathers and wings. But although the pink pigeon was for me now just a pigeon, I wondered at how still it was in the tree, how privileged I was to enjoy its company when at any moment it could choose to fly away. An explosion of noise and activity nearby interrupted my musing. At first I couldn't see what was happening, only that my sister was holding something, and everyone was shouting. I rushed to get a better look. In my sister's hand was the makeshift bottle rod. Dangling from it, an eel as long as her arm. One of my brothers considered himself something of a fishing expert, call it confidence or delusion, and tried to untangle the eel, but it had swallowed the hook, and his attempts to free it only wound it up more. The next thing I heard was my brother's shriek. Bright red gleamed on his palm. My mum leapt into action, running to check on his wound, while I was handed a penknife and the eel and told to cut it free. Apparently the hook was dissolvable, although maybe my dad just said that, so I didn't martyr myself for the eel too. With shaky hands, I cut the line, and the eel swam off. I hoped it would be okay. My brother, on the other hand, held a grudge. 2 years later, in Great Yarmouth, he took his revenge by eating the eel's brethren in jellied form. I had my own bone to pick with the eel. Apart from instilling in me a previously non-existent fear of eels, when I looked back at the tree, my bird had disappeared. It had obviously been frightened away. I was glad I'd seen it, but disappointed it had gone so soon. I returned from the trip with a newfound admiration for birds, and at 17, I did 2 weeks' work experience at a bird of prey centre. During that time, my bird obsession reached full maturity. There is nothing more special than placing your trust in an eagle with talons almost as long as your fingers and a razor-sharp beak to match. There is no feeling of vulnerability or connection like it. This experience tipped me over the edge, and I spent the rest of that summer researching the bird species of Mauritius. Having ticked my pigeon off the list, I decided during my next visit to the island I would track down the endangered Mauritius kestrel. Very early in the holiday, I spotted a bird just like I'd seen before the eel incident. I considered myself lucky to have seen it a second time. But the next day there was another, then another. Suddenly they seemed to be everywhere. I wondered with increasing anxiety why an uncommon bird was appearing in these numbers. It was then, with help from Google, I realised these weren't pink pigeons after all. These were Malagasy turtle doves, much more common and not unique to Mauritius. My heart hit the bottom of my ribcage. It was like discovering Santa isn't real for a second time. Although, at least I knew my pigeon was still out there somewhere. And this time, thanks to my now fully fledged avian obsession, I was far better equipped with knowledge of the local birds. My pigeon had won this battle, but I'd win the war. We had a trip planned to Île aux Aigrettes, a small coral island off the south coast of Mauritius that's free from invasive species and rich in endemic ones. If anything, that would be my best shot at seeing a pink pigeon. In the meantime, I still had my kestrel to track down. The day before Île aux Aigrettes, we went to La Vallée de Fenay, one of the best places to spot Mauritius kestrels. I glued my eyes to the sky, searching for any sign of them and their distinctive hovering. It was only by accident and a brief lapse in attention that my gaze dropped and landed on a bird I hadn't noticed before, strutting about in the shade. A pale pink, brown-winged, fuchsia-beaked bird. For a moment, I didn't think it was possible. A frantic Google search later, God forbid the bird flee and escape me again, I knew it was true. I'd finally found my pigeon. They say when it rains, it pours, and this applies to pigeons too. After 10 years without a single sighting, another pink pigeon came across my path the following day, on Île aux Aigrettes. The sudden abundance of them felt overwhelming. I wanted to ask, why now? Why did you make me wait so long for this moment? But the years in between, the anticipation, the pressure of only visiting Mauritius for 3 weeks at a time, made the eventual sighting far sweeter. I found my pigeon when I was ready to fully appreciate it. My fellow birdwatchers will know the satisfaction of spotting a new species fades. There's always something else you haven't seen. The Mauritius kestrel that still eludes me, the tiny olive white-eye, which I glimpsed but failed to photograph. Yes, I found my pigeon and my love for birds. But birdwatchers are insatiable. We always want more. Maybe, when I next return to Mauritius, I'll find my kestrel, or finally photograph the olive white-eye. Maybe I'll be bested and humiliated again. I don't know. That's the thrill of it, after all.
Well done, Jasmin. What a gorgeous story, and how gorgeous does Mauritius sound. Thank you so much for taking us there. Now, this is usually where I remind you about Patreon, but let's go back to the black box, where I explained the 10x9 ethos to the live audience.
As you know, 10x9 is always free and always will be. That is the mantra, and it will never change. And there's lots of reasons for it. One, I like free stuff. Everybody should be able to come to 10x9 without worrying about what it might cost. And three, the people telling the story shouldn't have to worry about anybody in the audience having paid to get in, because that puts off the people who are nervous and shy and reluctant, the people that we want to get. So that's why it's free. However, 10 by 9 does have some overheads. So many of you know this already. I'm sorry for repeating myself. But there is a website, there's recording equipment, there's software, etc., etc. It does all have to be paid for. Transport, you know the crack. Sadly, not everything in life is free. But 10 by 9 has never been about money. And I know it's not a good business model, but there you go. That's the way it is. It's very important that 10 by 9 will always be free. It's not a 10 by 9 if it's not free. It's as simple as that. You often hear, people don't value something that they don't pay for, and that is just not true. 10 by 9, and the other thing is, you are not the product here, by the way. People often say that, about Facebook and Instagram. Well, if you're not paying for it, then you're the product. You're not. This is a very legit contract we have with you. It's free in. If you want to give, if you can give, brilliant. If you can't, fine. And we'll plow on regardless. So, anyway, that was a wee bit soapboxy. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. But I actually genuinely do care about it. I care about it, it's free. I care that we want to get more people who are worried about, or nervous about telling their stories. So that's why I say, more women, please. Okay, and I never thought I would say that, but... A big shout out to Terry and Frida, who are celebrating their 56th wedding anniversary today. Congratulations, and I hope there are many, many more. That's wonderful. I'm so delighted you chose to spend your anniversary evening with us, so thank you. You're mad, but thank you.
Congratulations indeed to Terry and Frida, and thanks so much for spending your big evening with us. And if you can donate to 10 by 9, there's a Patreon link on the website. Thanks to everyone who has been so generous over the years. Okay, on to our third and final story on this podcast, and it's a cracker. Here's Dave Thompson.
So I was working at my laptop last year when the email pinged. And the subject line said, "Your EasyJet vouchers will expire on the 29th of July. I didn't know I had vouchers, but it turned out there was a little bit of leftover money from flights that had been cancelled during COVID. So that was the start of June. We had a few weeks with which to do something. And we decided on the spur of the moment that we would put the voucher towards flights to Liverpool at the start of July. And then we booked a few other things and 3 nights in a hotel just to make sure that we definitely used up that £80. I had wanted to see Liverpool for a while. I'd only ever really passed through on the way to somewhere else. And I really wanted to see the Beatles' homes. Paul McCartney and John Lennon's childhood homes are now owned by the National Trust and they're open to the public. So we booked our places. And then a month later, we set off. We flew into John Lennon Airport and we made our way to the city centre and the Hard Day's Night Hotel. Fairly standard hotel, but with Beatles pictures covering every available surface and Beatles music playing constantly. It's also right on the corner of Matthew Street where the site of the old Cavern Club was and now the new Cavern Club is, and not far from the docks and the big Beatles statue. So anyway, we saw the Beatles' homes. We loved every minute. We saw the porch where the Quarrymen, forerunner of the Beatles, had rehearsed when John's Aunt Mimi wasn't home. We saw the room where McCartney and Lennon had composed many of the early Beatles hits. And we particularly loved, this was a real highlight on the tour, there was a gentleman from the south of England who kept trying to add in his own insights into the tour. And the local tour guide was absolutely merciless in correcting him. So getting a little bit carried away with all things Beatles, we decided to see a little bit more with a ticket to ride on a Beatles Explorer tour. Bright yellow bus, open-topped, and the idea was that we'd go to all of the main Beatles-related sites in about 2 hours. We passed on the 4 to 5 hour Magical Mystery Tour. Didn't stretch that far, but 2 hours on Beatles Explorer seemed good enough. So we took our seats on the top deck in blistering sunshine and we set off. The start was a bit slow because we kind of snaked our way around the city centre and they showed us the Hard Day's Night Hotel and where Matthew Street was. And oh look, There's a statue of the Beatles here down at the docks. However, things brightened up a little bit. Suddenly they got a little bit more interesting, because about 15 minutes into the ride, we could hear the tour guide sort of slightly off microphone saying to somebody down the stairwell, "Oh, he's going to join us, is he? Great, great." And we didn't really pay much attention to that until a few minutes later, the tour guide announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest with us today, back in Liverpool, Ringo Starr." And up the staircase came, well, Ringo Starr. He was wearing a T-shirt that said "Peace," making a peace sign, like he does, and we gave him a round of applause as he went to sit on his seat near the front. He looked very like Ringo Starr. Like, really, really like Ringo Starr. And my brain kind of split into two. The sensible part knew it's not going to be Ringo Starr. But there was another, slightly more hopeful part, really wanted to believe that the first bit had got it wrong. So you can decide for yourself what you would have done, because I have the picture with me tonight. Lorraine and I looked at each other and went, nah. He definitely looked like Ringo, but he seemed just that little bit young. And we were on a Beatles tour bus. But there was a definite murmur of uncertainty from the other passengers. The tour continued. We stopped at Penny Lane. An Irishman a few seats behind us asked me as we got off the bus, "That's not really Ringo, is it?" I told him I was pretty sure it wasn't. We took photographs at the Penny Lane Street sign. It's now encased in Perspex after Paul McCartney famously signed it doing James Corden's Carpool Karaoke. Ringo happily posed with people while I studied his neck. It was definitely not wrinkly enough, I decided. Probably. Although this was, after all, a man who could probably afford to have a bit of work done. A few minutes later, I was put out of my misery. The tour guide suddenly announced, "Today is the 7th of July. It's Ringo's birthday. He's 83 today. Let's all sing happy birthday to Ringo." There we are on an open-top bus in Liverpool, happily singing happy birthday to Ringo Starr. And it was then that I really knew, because, let's face it, if you're one of the two remaining Beatles, and you've made it to 83, and you're on a Beatles Explorer Tour bus, driving around looking at sites like your old house in Dingle, then life's gone a wee bit shit for you, hasn't it? We stopped at Strawberry Fields. We took photos at the gates. We took more photos with Ringo, who didn't seem to mind at all. And then Ringo and I happened to be next to each other as we were getting back onto the bus. And I said, "After you, Ringo," and then laughed and said, "There's a sentence I didn't think I'd use today." And we both laughed, and a conversation began. Ringo, or rather Michael, was from Cleveland. He was a drummer, and he looked a bit like Ringo. I believe what he actually said was, "I think I've got the nose for it." He had played the part of Ringo in a band for one particular gig, and it went down really well. It seemed that people liked Michael from Cleveland pretending to be Ringo Starr. And so he kept doing it until eventually he was able to make a bit of a living from doing it. That weekend, he was in Liverpool for a Beatles weekend, and I held back from saying to him that I was pretty sure every weekend in Liverpool seemed to be a Beatles weekend. And the tour continued. We drove past every conceivable Beatles-related place, including some quite obscure sites like This Is the Park, where Julia and Freddie Lennon first met. We finished the tour. We thanked our tour guide. We thanked our bus driver, because we're from Northern Ireland and that's what we do. We thanked Ringo, and we wished him all the best for, well, looking like Ringo that weekend. But genuinely, my chat with Ringo, or rather Michael, had been a little bonus to our impromptu holiday. Later, back at the Hard Day's night, I posted the picture of the three of us on Facebook. It quickly gathered comments, including, "Oh, I love Keith," because some of my friends just can't help being sarcastic. But there was also "no," and "wow, meeting Ringo in Liverpool, so lucky," and "how fantastic, we'll have to hear the story when you get home." I didn't correct any of them.
Dave, that was so good. Ringo Starr, indeed. Brilliant. The photo is already up on our socials. Thank you. And that's it for this podcast. I'll stick out a bonus pod soon and hope to be back with another full podcast at the end of the month. 10 by 9 is continuing as always. Make sure to check out all the upcoming events on our website, 10by9.com. They're updated regularly, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and or Instagram. We won't flood your feed with nonsense, just information. Thanks to everyone who makes 10 by 9 happen: Leanne McConville, Margaret McClory and Cara Doran. Thanks too to the team at the Black Box, our home since 2011. And thanks to the 10 by 9 audience, which as ever was so supportive and warm. And of course thanks to all our storytellers, but the biggest thanks this time goes to Richard O'Leary, Jasmin Awoodun and Dave Thompson. I'm Paul Doran, and I'll be back with another podcast soon. But for now, bye bye.